Hey everybody, welcome back. This week we're going to be making one of, in my opinion, the best summer sandwiches going. This is my wife's favorite thing to eat in July and August when the tomatoes are at their best. And this sandwich is so simple and so outrageously good and only has a few simple ingredients. So let's get to it. First off, we're going to make the bread for this sandwich. So this is basically my pizza dough recipe with just a little bit of a modification. So in the bowl of a stand mixer, I'm going to measure out 100 grams of warm to hot water. To that, I'm going to add 50 grams of milk. And this milk is going to keep the dough a little bit softer and less crispy than I would generally want my pizza dough. To that, I'm going to add 5 grams of yeast, 10 grams of olive oil, 210 grams of regular all-purpose flour, and 5 grams of salt. I'll fit the mixer with the dough hook, and then on a low speed to start with, I'm just going to get all these ingredients incorporated. Once everything's come together, you can turn the speed up to a medium-high. You want the dough to get a good slap around in the bowl here. This will help develop the gluten. Then after 4 to 5 minutes, I'll turn this off and I'll scrape the dough back into the bowl. It will be a little bit sticky still. Then you want to cover the bowl with plastic wrap or a tea towel and set this somewhere fairly warm for it to start to rise. After about 20 minutes, you can open it up, and we want to give this sort of a stretch and fold type of action like you would with a sourdough bread. So to do that, you stretch up one side and kind of fold it over the rest of the dough. Then you turn the bowl about a quarter turn or so, stretch and fold again. Now keep repeating this a few times until you've gone all the way around the bowl. Recover with the plastic wrap and set aside for another 20 minutes. Now 20 minutes later, we're going to do another stretch and fold all the way around. And then we'll recover this and we'll let it rise one last time, this time for 30 to 40 minutes. All right, now here we are 40 minutes later, and you can see this dough has really risen up and gotten nice and bubbly. So we're ready to turn this out and roll it. So I'm going to flour up the countertop and then I'll scrape out the dough. They make a nice silicone tool that helps you scrape out a bowl like this, but I don't have one, so I'm just going to use my fingers here. And then I'll dust this with a little bit more flour and just give it a gentle knead on the counter. This is mostly just to work the rest of the air out of the dough and get it ready for shaping. Now, normally I would be making double this amount of dough and divide it into 4 pieces, but I'm just cooking for myself here today, so I've halved the recipe and I'm going to divide it into 2 roughly even pieces. So you can use a rolling pin like I am here, or you could hand stretch these, however you want to do them. Just get them into a nice, thin, roughly round shape. Now the dough is going to want to tend to shrink back smaller than you've stretched it out, so I find it helpful to kind of go back and forth between the two, letting one rest while I stretch out the other one, and then vice versa. Also, this dough is still fairly sticky, so you're going to need to keep the countertop, the rolling pin, and your hands fairly well floured. Once you have these nicely rolled out and stretched, you want to brush with a thin layer of olive oil, and then we're going to fold these in half, so the oil is going to stop the 2 sides from fusing together when it bakes. So I just brush this on, spread it out fairly evenly, and then you want to fold each one of these over in half and transfer it to a baking sheet. I've lined my baking sheet with parchment paper. And these definitely don't need to be perfect. You can see here this one's a little bit of a wonky shape and the one side is bigger than the other when I fold it over, and that's okay. You just stretch this out a little bit to fit, and don't worry too much if it doesn't lie perfectly flat. Okay, final touch here before we bake these is to drizzle with a little more olive oil on the top, and then we're just going to dust these with a little bit of dried oregano. and then some good flaky sea salt. And these are going to go into a hot oven, about 500 degrees, for a little less than 10 minutes usually, but you want to keep an eye on them. You definitely want to pull these out when they're cooked, but not overly browned and crispy. Now while those are baking, we're going to focus on the filling. Like I said earlier, this is a super simple sandwich, very few ingredients. What this really does is focus on the tomatoes in the sandwich. This is something that we really only eat a couple of months out of the year, when you can pick really good tomatoes right off the vine and eat them straight away. This is very much a tomato-forward sandwich. So I'm going to use two kinds of tomatoes here. I have a Costalutto Genovese, and then these smaller ones are called Tigerellas. I'm just going to slice these up, and they are still warm from the sun. I just picked these. So the second main ingredient in this sandwich is going to be the basil. There really isn't a substitute I could recommend for fresh basil here. The sandwich really is all about great tomatoes and fresh basil, so you have to either buy or pick it fresh for this. Alright, so it's time to assemble. Now because we coated the inside of these with that olive oil, we should, while only mildly burning our fingers, be able to pry these open and kind of flatten them out. As you can see, they're cooked, but they're still slightly flexible. Now, all the toppings here are optional. I'm going to be making this sandwich for me to eat right now, so I'm going to make it the way I want it, with a little bit of Grana Padano cheese grated over top here. You could also use Parmigiano Reggiano, or Romano would also work. So would a grated mozzarella, or even better, a fresh mozzarella would be awesome. Then I'm going to go in here with a good layer of the tomatoes. And then with all tomatoes, it's absolutely essential, in my opinion, that you hit them with a pretty heavy dose of flaky sea salt. Don't skimp here. The salt really accentuates the tomato flavor. Now I'm also going to give these a good amount of cracked black pepper. Again, I recommend you don't skimp on this. And then follow that up with the basil leaves. And I'm not even going to cut these ones up. You may want to chop them or mince them up depending on your tolerance for eating whole leaves of basil. I really like it like this, so I'm just leaving them whole. And then I'm going to add a little drizzle of olive oil. You could also add a bit of balsamic vinegar here, but in my opinion, these tomatoes are too good to cover them up with anything, so I'm just going to have a little bit of olive oil. Now in the past, we've also added other things to these sandwiches. Prosciutto is awesome. Other thinly sliced meats or salamis would be great. But for today, I'm just going simple. And that's it. That's the dish. Freshly baked bread, tomatoes still warm from the sun in the garden, fresh basil, flaky sea salt, pepper, a little bit of cheese. I could honestly eat this just about every day in the summer. So let's take a look at what this costs to make. Okay, so as you can see here, our total cost to make these two sandwiches was $6.83. Now if you look a little closer, you can see that I did include costs here for purchasing the tomatoes and the basil at a store. Because I grew these, the actual cost for these tomatoes was really hard to capture, but we do grow the food in the garden to be eaten, partly as a cost savings on groceries through the summer. So if I remove those costs and treat them as already recognized somewhere else in our family's budget, then the actual grocery cost to make these two sandwiches was more like 83 cents, about 40 cents per sandwich. So just like any recipe that involves using yeast and baking, there's going to be some amount of required resting time, waiting for the dough to rise and get ready for baking. So I've captured that time here in the prep time. In reality, it probably does take around 2 hours to get these ready from start to finish, including making the dough, proofing, rolling, shaping, baking, and then loading up the sandwiches to eat them. Alright folks, well that's it for this one. That's my wife's absolute favorite summer sandwich, probably mine as well. I do hope you give this one a try. If you enjoyed this video or you found it useful, please do hit that like button. And as this is a new channel, I'd very much appreciate you subscribing so that I can keep bringing you more videos. Thanks very much. Talk soon.